recognizing and understanding the problem is 50% of the solution, and I'm glad to say that the state of Alabama has finally recognized the problem, the insidiousness of sustainable development and Agenda 21, and they've actually enacted a law in the state. Now, it's not a silver bullet. It's going to take a lot of legwork and a lot of thought in order to try to make the various municipalities and county governments rescind their comprehensive plan and other plans that are enacting this socialist agenda. There is one county already, Baldwin County, and I gave Dave a copy of the hour and 16-minute video that I put together from their day-long session, because Baldwin County was the first county to really understand what comprehensive planning was all about. And when the law came into effect, they used that as a straw for the they broke the camel's back, so to speak, in order to rescind their comprehensive plan. They had a public meeting that began at 8:30. It ended about 2, and there were over 200 people that came to speak. It was a wonderful meeting. I have never been in a room with so many people that knew about Agenda 21, spoke eloquently about it, and on the DVD that I gave Dave, and it's also on the internet. So if you go to our website and click on the media page, it's one of the top ones that was just put up recently. At the end of that, there's probably 30 minutes of it maybe is the public speakers or people that wanted to speak about Agenda 21. Then the county commissioners told what they thought, and that really, for me, is a selling point for your local elected officials. So you might want to just spool up the DVD and take that section to your elected official and let them take a look at it and see what Baldwin County had to say. Now, along the lines of publicizing this, which we didn't really do, it got more press in the foreign service and foreign media than it did over here. And we got a call from a lady in Sydney, Australia, and they paid our way over to go and talk to their elected officials about Agenda 21, which they just had become acquainted with. Even though they have enacted and enabled 7,000 treaties with the UN, they were not aware of Agenda 21 and sustainable development, and they've been suffering from it in a very serious manner. As a matter of fact, the Coral Sea, which used to be a huge fishing ground for Australia, is now off limits because it is an aquatic core area. And they are not allowed to fish there. They have no fish canneries at all in Australia. Everything fish comes from Southeast Asia, so it's kind of a redistribution of wealth. So one of the handouts is the Public Law 2012-598. If you didn't get a copy of it, Dana's got a copy over there.
Handouts whenever you want.
Sustainable development is a religion, and it has a long history in this country. It goes all the way back. May even predate 1969, but one of the watershed pieces of legislation was NEPA, which was adopted in 1969. They waited for Richard Nixon to come into office in 1970. He is a supposed conservative, and he signed it into law. Another watershed event was the Earth Day celebration, which occurred in 1970, and all of this meshed together, and now we have a sincere group of people that worship the earth. Of course, it is the basis upon which society is being restructured, and it is intended to be a self-regulating governance system, and we'll go over governance and how it's set up. I don't have the slide up here in this particular presentation that gives the verbatim quote, but essentially it is a set of rules and regulations that govern the behavior of individuals, organizations, and companies, and that's from the 1999 Human Development Report, right in the very beginning. Thank you, Dave. And so that now, if you watch your media, you'll find that word governance is replacing governments, and it is not representative government. This is a coalition of NGOs, non-governmental organizations, businesses, and the government that have come together to create this system. This is a slide that I have put together. Most of the slides that you're going to see hereafter are slides from proponents of sustainable development. I really believe that this photograph is applicable today, because the people that agree with the sustainable development and the basic tenets of it on a higher plane are just as adamant and vehement as the individuals were back in the 1930s, and I rather think it's going to end very badly, exactly like it did in the World War II. This is the front page or cover page for the report that the United States has submitted to the United Nations back in 2002. All of the countries that have agreed to sustainable development have actually submitted reports detailing what they have done in order to implement the tenets of this. This is 156 pages long. It's alphabetical. Nothing's secret here. Everything, anybody can go out and download any one of these reports. Now, this is the index page for the 2002 summit, and I'm going to run a series of total nine slides in just a few minutes. The first 7 are from the opening ceremony at this particular conference. You're going to see still photographs of what was occurring on stage, and you're going to hear an individual speak with a very heavy accent to a group of young people, explaining to them what is wrong with Mother Earth. At the end of that, then you're going to hear Colin Powell say that you and I have an enduring commitment to sustainable development. So here we go.
Life began with the earth, then came the plants, the animals, and finally the human being. Yes, we are all children of Mother Earth. That is why we must take care of her and beat her custodian. She is the hand that feeds us and the heart that heals us. But I'm sad to say, we are failing. Greed and foolishness are eating deep into the fabric of humankind. We are failing to love and care for Mother Earth. This summit has cemented a new vision of sustainable development. The Johannesburg Plan of Action consolidates our work plans into one common agenda that includes our best thinking on sustainable development. Ladies and gentlemen, President Bush and the American people have an enduring commitment to sustainable development.
Well, that was 2002. Secretary of State Colin Powell was Secretary of State for the 43rd President of the United States, President Bush. And in 1992, the 41st President, his father, President Bush, also went to Rio and signed this document for the United States. So we have continuity because when Clinton came in, we had the President's Council on Sustainable Development. We had a whole litany of things that have occurred between the different parties. The agenda is being pushed by all of the various factions of both parties. This is Rio Plus 20, which just occurred this past June, and here now is what our Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, had to say.
We have coalesced around an outcome document that marks a real advance for sustainable development. We know this is one of the most pressing matters of our time, because how we grow together over the long term isn't a question for only some countries. It is a question for all countries. A more prosperous future is within our reach. A future where all people benefit from sustainable development, no matter who they are or where they live. And that is why in the 21st century, the only viable development is sustainable development. We also have to be thinking different about development in our cities under the joint initiative on urban sustainability that President Rousseff and President Obama kicked off last year. We are bringing political officials from every level, from state, county, local, municipalities together, along with industry leaders and developers to find creative ways to generate sustainable economic growth. Let's use the private sector, particularly the consumer goods companies, as they have agreed to do, to make sure they have sustainable supply chains, the right kind of packaging and marketing that puts the least amount of burden on the earth we share. Let's bring in the nonprofits, the civil society organizations, faith groups, individuals, all of us, committed to realize sustainable development goals that we have embraced. We know that we will be judged not by what we say, nor even by what we intend to do, but by whether we deliver results for people alive today and whether we keep faith with future generations. I'm very honored to be here with all of you, and I pledge my country's, the Obama administration's, and my own personal efforts to continue our work together. We simply cannot afford to fail. Thank you all very much.
Well, so far we've seen examples of the international level, and here now is an example of the state of Tennessee. Back in 2009, they passed this particular law. There was a companion bill, one in the Senate and one in the House. These two individuals are perceived to be conservative. Where their heart lies, I have no idea. But this particular law says that they're going to reconstruct, redevelop public infrastructure, quite literally everything, but not limited to the following: water, solid waste, transportation, telecommunication, energy, a whole litany of things. And all of this is to be reconstructed that incorporate principles of urban sustainability and global sustainable development. So there are lots of people now that have brought this forward and asked these two representatives why they included this, and they said, frankly, I don't know. It's just there. So you can kind of get an idea. If they were telling the truth, then, well, I hate to use the term useful idiot, but that's, I think, would be applicable in this particular case. Now, I'm going to spool this up. This is just trying to get through this a little bit quicker. This is included in a lot of videos that I have. And turn the sound off and just tell you what she has to say. This is Mrs. Googe. She was at the time, 2009 I believe it was, the county commissioner for Carroll County, Maryland, and she was also the spokesperson for the National Association of County Commissioners. And she was testifying before the Urban Banking Committee here about the Livable Communities Act, which indeed passed, and money is now flowing out of Washington all across the country, helping to implement the tenets of this. And she talks about local government is to determine where the growth is going to be developed and how it's going to work and how livability is going to work. Won't be left up to the individual, and that's a gross understatement when I say that. She also talked about setting aside 100,000 acres of her county as green space, open space. It has a number of different names, but at any rate, all of that property would be purchased by having bonds floated or going into debt by the county government, and that land comes off the tax roll, and you know who's going to have to make up the other property tax. So this is essentially what she began to talk about. She also talked about reducing the county's carbon footprint, which will be applicable to you, as you'll see as we go through this particular presentation. Now, there's a couple of treaties that are really bearing down on us that we really don't know about. One of them is the Climate Change Treaty. It was associated with Agenda 21. There was actually 3 treaties, but the 2 I'm going to speak to tonight are the biodiversity, and this one, the climate change. And here now I've got a couple examples of the softer cell, as I have labeled it. And this says that in Sumner County, Tennessee, county planners are developing a natural resource plan that will be an addition to their comprehensive plan, which gets into climate change and the impacts of climate change. Of course, that means that there's going to be some more regulations coming as soon as this plan is completed. Now, here is the Citizen's Guide to Sustainability. In other words, we want you to incorporate the tenets of this. This is on the Knoxville's website, so all you have to do is go out and look it up. And I pulled this off in reference to the carbon footprint. Of course, that was what Mrs. Googe was talking about. And it says a carbon footprint is a measure of the impact of our activities on the environment. The measure calculates the amount of greenhouse gas produced in your daily lives through the different activities, such as, and it goes through a list here, burning fossil fuels. Well, gasoline is not just the only fossil fuel. There'll be natural gas, coal. I know that Obama has intent on shutting down all of the coal-fired power plants across this country, so that will absolutely raise our energy rates. And material use. Now, A little bit later, I'm going to talk about ICC codes, International Code Council. But I just want to make the point here that the two examples. First, Havisham County, Georgia, one individual, and I know I've heard lots of people say, well, I'm just one individual, what can I do? But this one individual didn't say that. He actually stood on the street corner in Havisham, Georgia, and gave out flyers about what the county was about to adopt. And those regulations would have put severe restrictions on building a new structure, on energy conservation, all of it under the ICC. And he got 150 people to show up at the county commissioners meeting, and they couldn't get a motion to bring the motion up to vote on it. So it was dead before it ever got there. In Decatur, Alabama, nobody came front to front. And the city actually adopted these codes. There was a newspaper article that quoted one developer that was there, and he said, now, since this has gone into effect, I have to identify the ingredients in concrete and tell where those ingredients came from. Later on, it will be whether or not it was environmentally, socially, and economically developed, extracted from Mother Earth, and put in the concrete in order to get certification for pouring the concrete. Now, there's another thing that he said is that all of the material has to be sourced from within 500-mile radius of where the building's being constructed. So you kind of get an idea of where all of this is going with material use. Transportation, as we will see later on, is also involved in this. And water use. They're putting wellhead meters to regulate how much water you actually extract from Mother Earth. So if you want to do a little more research on this and you're taking notes, go up and look up the International Water Council. I think the last thing I saw from them was a limit of maybe a gallon and a half of water for each person in the world is what we should actually be shooting for. Now, the results of a carbon footprint calculation show that you are consuming more than one person's needs for resources. So we want to limit and know how many resources you're extracting from Mother Earth. This is all quoted from the Sustainability Guide in Knoxville. So, now I'm gone from two examples of the soft cell. This is the hard cell. So I don't think we have anybody in here that has a squeamish eye. I have had individuals that said, oh, that's just terrible, I can't watch that. And some even got up and left, and others just hide their eyes. So if we have any that don't like blood and faint when they see blood, we'll pick you up after this is over with. This was 2009. It's an advertisement from England. And it is to help you and encourage you to reduce your carbon footprint by 10% in the coming 2010. And I've got to turn this
There's a
down.
brilliant idea in the air that I'd like to run by you. Now it's called 10-10. The idea is everyone starts cutting their carbon emissions by 10%, thus keeping the planet safe for everyone eventually. Now this hasn't got to be a huge thing, but I would love it if you and your families would think about doing something.
What sort of thing, miss?
Well, like getting your dad to insulate a loft, or taking your next holiday by train instead of flying, or buying energy-saving light bulbs. We're thinking of using our car less. I'm going to cycle to school. That's fantastic, Jemima. Now, no pressure at all, but it'd be great to get a sense of how many of you might do this. Just a rough percentage. That's fantastic! And there's not. Philip and Tracy. Oh, fine, that's absolutely fine. Your own choice. Okay, class, thank you so much for today, and I will see you all tomorrow. Oh, just before you go, I just need to press this little button here. Now, everybody, please remember to read chapters 5 and 6 on volcanoes and glaciation, except for Philip and Tracy, of course.
Right, just want to check on that 10-10 thing. Had some brilliant ideas from lots of you, how the firm can cut down emissions by 10%. Just quick show of hands, everyone who wants to get involved. Great, that's nearly everybody. And yeah, just for the record, no pressure. Those who aren't quite convinced about it yet. Cool, no problem, your choice. Okay, so those of you planning something here or at home should probably get working on it. Oh, gorgeous. Those of you who aren't,
great to be back here at Spurs. So many happy memories for me. Anyway, tell me something. What is this 10-10 thing the club is doing?
Well, it means that we're trying to cut our carbon emissions by 10% this year. And Tottenham Hotspur Football Club was the first to sign up.
We've changed the floodlights on our lane, so no low energy. Lots of our fans are coming to matches on buses, trains, bikes and stuff, rather than coming by car.
I see. Whatever, I wouldn't do it. It seems like distraction from football to me.
That's just fine, David. You don't have to join in, just ignore it. No pressure. Well, let's do some penalties.
10-10. Hundreds of thousands of people, schools, businesses, hospitals, movie stars, knitting circles, scout troops, presidents and governments, all tackling climate change in more than 40 countries. Care to join us? No pressure. Is that okay?
Sounded great to me. Thanks,
Okay.
Julian.
Happy to help.
So what are you thinking of doing for 10-10 yourself?
What, are you kidding me? I thought that by doing this voiceover, that was my contribution.
Right. No, absolutely. No pressure.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Okay, now, just so you don't miss it, there's an eyeball right there, and there's one right there. These people are absolutely serious about what they're talking about. And I want to make the point that during World War II, there was a decision made not to show the horrendous things that war brings. We didn't want the people back home to lose heart and have a cry to bring the men back home, because war is just too horrible to prosecute. Well, the men that went across Europe and saw that all that war had to offer, and they went into the Auschwitz and these other places where the bodies were piled high, you know, they just absolutely wept at what they saw. And there was a decision made that we cannot not afford to pass along a record, a photographic record, a film record of what occurred here, so that this would never happen again. Well, those films were made after a socialist agenda had come full circle. Well, here we have another socialist agenda, and we have the advantage of seeing what these people think of us, because we don't want to accept their values and their system. And they are telling us that if we don't accept it, this is what they would just as soon do to us. We have a great advantage here, and we need to take that to heart and understand what this means to us. Now, we've looked at examples of the Climate Change Treaty and other examples of the national and state level, international level. So now I want to kind of focus in on what it actually means to be a citizen in a sustainable community. And this particular slide, and I want to make the point that if you use Agenda 21, don't just focus in on Agenda 21. It's just one plan of action along the way for this socialist agenda, because we've got Habitat 1 and Habitat 2, and we're going to look at two quotes from those. This happens to be an award-winning program from Habitat 2, 1996, in Istanbul, Turkey. There were 3 gold medals that were given out at that particular conference, and this won one of those gold medals. It was introduced to that conference by the School of Architecture of the Washington State University, and it has the actual definitive answer of what is a sustainable community. Now, if you go to your local planner and you say, well, what is a sustainable community, or to your politician, he's going to say, well, obviously we don't know because we haven't had your public input. All you need to do is come into one of these visioning sessions, and we'll sit down with you and we'll just map out what your future wants to look like, and then we'll go from there, and we'll create that wonderful future for you. Well, you know, I'm a little bit old. I wasn't born last night, that's for sure, and I didn't fall off the turnip truck yesterday. So here we go. This is a sustainable development community. It is one which provides all of its own needs for air, water, land, food, fiber, and energy resources within the confines of its own site. Quite literally, every community is to create every one of those items I just read off. There is a movement currently for fiber shed, the fiber used in your clothing is grown within a geographical area. Look up FiberShed on the internet. All of the dyes would be created. All of the labor that it takes to sew and put a garment together would come together within a specific area of your community. And we'll look in just a few minutes at Food Shed, excuse me. This is a proclamation from Lewis County, Tennessee. They have adopted something called permaculture. You have some permaculture communities here in Virginia. I have not used those as an example because they're a voluntary means, or the people have come together in a very voluntary way and desire to create this. That's something outside of the scope of government, but here we have a proclamation. This was 2009, and all of the elected officials in Hohenwald and Lewis County, Tennessee, signed this document. And it says right here, this almost the last whereas, that everyone in the community should adopt the principles of sustainable development and inspire their neighbor to do the same thing. Now, one of the very good things that has come out of this particular trip that I've made, I started out in Lewis County. Now, I have been using film from the celebration of Lewis County where they had a number of people that came together and they filmed the great celebration where they were accepted into this program, because this is a global movement. And in that presentation that I made, by the way, it's on the DVD over there. You can go and look at it. I think it's rather eye-opening. The cheerleader, and she says, I'm an old cheerleader from way back. She's about 50 years old. And she talks about the fact that when she found out what permaculture was all about, by the way, this is just the combination of two words, permanent agriculture. So Lewis County is essentially saying we don't want to have any kind of production other than permanent agriculture. She says, when I understood that this was about caring for the Earth's people, I just said that I could sign on for that. Well, she left off all of the other tenets of it, and in that presentation, which I made for them this past Thursday night, it included all of those tenets. One of the tenets goes in and says that we need to do away with all that worldview that was created 2,000 years ago that said that the earth is a proving ground to see if we are good enough to go to a better place, and that human beings are basically sinners and flawed in the beginning, and we need a savior. Those kinds of things need to be done away with. We need to adopt things like all decisions are made by consensus, and private property is a disincentive to sharing and needs to be done away with because it incorporates hoarding and allows people to hoard things. So those are the kinds of things that we need to do away with. Well, during the presentation, I also made a comment about the biodiversity treaty, which you're going to see in a few minutes. And I said, if you know where the land is that's going to be set aside for animals, and where the land is that we're going to be allowed to live, this kind of sets up a situation where someone in real estate and someone in a political position could converse with each other, and perhaps there might be some corruption that would go on from that knowledge. Well, lo and behold, during the Q&A, a lady stood up, the very first person stood up and said, I sell real estate and my husband is on the county commissioners. So you can see at that moment the emotional escalator was set in motion. and I'm glad to say by the end of this it was a very good meeting, because the mayor for Hohenwald stood up and said, I don't remember signing that. I don't think it was a good idea that I did sign it, and I'm going to check into it and find out if indeed what has been presented here is true, and if it is, I'm going to have a public signing rescinding this document. So now he is an influential individual in the community, and he said, I'm going to try to get everybody else to do the same thing. The suggestion was made, well, if you're going to do that, why don't you also have a public letter sent to your state delegation and to your state governor saying that you want anti-Agenda 21 law adopted when you rescind this proclamation. And I said, oh, that's a very good idea. And I said, well, if you do that, let us know, and we'll have lots of cameras, and we'll film it, because this needs to be recorded and put on the net, that you are rescinding this concept of sustainable development in Lewis County. So it is possible to actually have a politician. It's much like seeing a pastor say, well, last week was a mistake in the sermon, so here now I'm going to give you the straight dope on it. So it really was a good situation last Thursday. Freedom of choice. What does freedom of choice mean for someone that might live in a sustainable community? And this is, and I have a hard copy of this particular document, Under Construction Tools and Techniques for Local Planning. And by the way, this is produced by the state of Minnesota. This is an official document of the state of Minnesota, and on page 73 it has the definition for freedom of choice. People should be able to choose where they live and do business as long as they pay the unidentifiable cost for on other people or nature now or in the future. Now, most people don't have a clue what this is all about, but it actually contains the three primary tenets of sustainable development. The first one is intergenerational equity. We have to restrict the amount of resources that we extract or exploit from Mother Earth in order to reserve resources for future generations. So who's going to do that? Who's going to look into the crystal ball and determine how many generations down the road are going to need gasoline, electricity, all of the things that we take for granted today? I have no idea, but I'm sure there is a commission that's being set up to do that. Now the next thing is that's intergenerational equity. Intragenerational equity means that we have to distribute everything equally across this current generation that exists. And then we have something called species equity. So usually when I comment on species equity, I see people squint up and say, oh, we'll never have that, that's just pie in the sky. But actually we've been accustomed to it for a number of years because we have the Endangered Species Act. And that came in the 1970s. It usurps God's rightful throne because he gave dominion to man over earth. And here now is the it's the Council on Environmental Quality under the executive branch, set up by NEPA, and they are the organization that determines the criteria that establishes which species is going to have more rights than man. So this is a usurpation of God's rightful throne wrapped up into this definition. Now the ICC codes, the International Code Council, of course, is formulating rules and regulations. Here are 15 of those codes. They can add to them anytime they want to. Any community across this country may adopt these codes. Most of them have already adopted the building codes and the energy conservation codes. And these codes are rewritten and updated every 3 years. There is a movement now to incorporate the concept of amortization of non-conforming use, so that if you're in compliance this year and they rewrite the regulations next year, you're not in conformance. And the objective of the community would, of course, be to reduce the carbon footprint. And if your particular structure is not meeting the objective of the community, it would be destroyed in order to rebuild the particular structure according to the new criteria. So that's something that we need to begin to understand and look for regulations that would creep into our local ordinances dealing with these ICC codes. Now here are some of the requirements for the ICC code. Requirements not specifically covered by this code shall be determined by the code enforcement official. So you can see how much of a blank check and authority he has. Then the code official shall have the authority to render interpretations of these codes. So, next, you enjoy that, you'll enjoy this one. The code official is by virtue of his job a member of the appeals board. So now get into a discussion with the guy on the job site, and you know what happens when you go for an appeal. This is a bureaucracy and tyranny set up from the get-go. An application for appeal shall be based on the claim that the code or the rules legally adopted have been incorrectly interpreted. That's the only way that you can appeal the code. Other than that, there is no appeal. Now, failure to comply will result in a lien against your property, and of course they could sell the property in order to satisfy the lien. So that's where we are typically with these codes. Now, here's a newscast that is only 2 minutes long, and it is actually part of a 10-minute video that's been put together. The name of it is A Christmas Grim, Code Enforcement Past, Present, and Future. Now, I've only picked up on the 2 minutes in the middle. In the beginning, it has Marlena Dietrich singing Lily Marlene in the beginning, and it morphs into the German orchestra and band rendition of that particular song, and then there's photographs of what was going on locally, and you'll see brown shirts, and then you see a grandmother that was arrested in Orem, Utah because she couldn't water her grass. She's on a fixed income. They broke her nose when they arrested her. Just some of the code enforcement violations. Now, at the end of the song, it goes black as it is now, and you hear marching, and soldiers marching, and then you pick up on this newscast. It goes dark again, and then you hear the marching, and you see a quote that 80% of the Gestapo calls were from people turning their neighbor in. And this is a White Rose production. If you don't know what the White Rose was in World War II, go look it up as part of your homework assignment. At the end of this, there is a man that stands before his county commissioners, practically has tears in his eyes, and he tells them what they are doing to his private property rights. So I encourage you to go out to our media page and take a look at this 10-minute video. So now if I can get my hand up, here we go.
Figuring out the root cause of all violence is a top priority of the Salinas Police Department, so now they're branching out. They're looking to other resources, such as the Salinas Code Enforcement Division at the City Manager's Office. Together, they're trying to uncover the warning signs before a major crime happens. Action News reporter Robbie Kapoor is live in our Salinas newsroom with more on that. Robbie?
Well, Dina, in an internal study, code enforcement believes there's a direct correlation between minor code infringements and major crime. So stopping the minor infractions is a real priority now for the city of Salinas. The warning signs are clear, but are often ignored.
Many times when we find these properties, everything is wrong with it. We find people living in the garage, people living in sheds.
From abandoned cars to untenable conditions, the blight we see in our neighborhoods could be a direct factor in major crimes. And frequently, the products of those environments go down the wrong path.
And what happens to these kids when they grow up living under those conditions? They want out. Who pulls them? Possibly gangs.
The number one issue that people will call in and talk about is the gang problem. I mean, that's above and beyond everything else. And then code violations is number two.
Talk show host Mark Carbonero hears the complaints from locals daily and wants Salinas to create an anonymous forum that encourages community members to report the blight.
People are reticent because they don't know that their personal information will be protected.
Salinas police are working closely with code enforcement, stepping in patrols to cite illegal activity before it leads to something even graver.
Code enforcement will not get rid of the problem. I'm sure prevent from problems.
Well, Dina, code enforcement is a bit understaffed for a city of Salinas' size, but they are adding another member, and it's more critical now than ever, which is why they're adding more staff.
And again, that's part of the City Manager's Office?
It's their own division, and they work very closely. In fact, we went out with both police and code enforcement. They are in contact each day.
Great. All right. Thanks a lot. Code enforcement encourages neighbors contact them anonymously as a first step to getting things in motion to possibly curb the violence.
Slide is actually a photograph of a badge from the EPA, Office of Criminal Enforcement. You can actually commit a crime against Mother Nature. In Birmingham, we already have the Environmental Police Force. There's one in Atlanta. There's one in Mobile. This is a growing concern, I think, or should be for everyone. Ground penetrating radar. Alabama was the very first state to have ground penetrating radar, and because it was developed at Huntsville. I know Charles knows some people down that way. Here's what ground penetrating radar is.
The main thing that we were looking for from a state perspective is a common operating picture that could be applied across all 67 counties. Virtual Alabama is built upon the Google Earth enterprise, which we took Google Earth and took it behind a state firewall.
We're using it now for economic development projects, for environmental management, for conservation of natural resources. With our imagery, you can populate the gas lines, water lines, stoplights, stop signs, fire hydrants, floodplains.
We're really working hard to help bring situational awareness to our schools. being able to see interiors of buildings and floor plans to provide fire evacuation routing and emergency planning for those administrators in those schools. And also, Google Earth gives us the ability to be able to see camera feeds.
Our Environmental Protection Agency uses it quite extensively also. So back at their office, they can actually see if anybody is violating the environmental protection laws.
Every week we get new reports from our user communities of the different ways that they're using Virtual Alabama.
We want to say, look, here's a platform that we can provide to you for free. Now, go out and do great things with it. Whatever Google comes up with, we then can take advantage of to make our application better.
Well, that should make everybody feel warm and fuzzy about ground penetrating radar. Now, code enforcement officers have been to this gentleman's house. As a matter of fact, this was emailed to me while I was up on this in Virginia here just a day or so ago. And this is a Korean War veteran. He's 79 years old and he gets 30 days in jail for junk on his property. That's a photograph of his yard. I mean, the man fought in a war for this country, and here now we are throwing him in jail because he has something on his property. It's quite unimaginable to me that we have come this far in this country. Now, at the end of this, we'll kind of get into what you can do and what we should be alerted to in order to try to alleviate this problem. I rather think in major cities, at least, if we had just a few people that were alerted to this, retired, and knew how to stop this, we could stop it in short order through the legal system. I do know that there is a Mr. Steve Scott in Florida. The code enforcement officer doesn't even come to their neighborhood anymore because he has been so successful in extracting money from risk management of the state of Florida because they violated the Constitution, not constitutional rights. We have no constitutional rights. The unalienable rights affirmed in the Constitution. So at the end of this, we'll kind of go over and have a Q&A on what you can do. What will it mean in this modern sustainable community with how do we cope with products now that need to be disposed of in a proper manner? And I'll kind of go over this rather quickly. This is RFID, radio frequency identification chips, and I think most everybody has already heard about this. These chips can be mounted in anything. They're real small. For instance, here's a chip. You can't even see it in a paper container. This is in the top of a medicine cap. This one is inside a label that's in the coat, and this is in a flip-flop shoe. These are just some of the examples of where you might find an RFID, radio frequency identification chip. Now, if you hold your money, your currency up to the light, and I don't think it's in a $1 bill, but they're in 5 or up, you'll see a strip. It is a passive RFID chip. You hit it with a gun or reader, and it will bounce a signal off and return the information of what denomination that chip is. So we've had trucks, tractor trailers moving from Atlanta through Birmingham that they just randomly stopped and happened to find over $1 million in the tractors. So I'm sure that this was just a random stop, but they just happened to find that money in the truck. Well, this is a slide from a proponent of RFID chips. They're actually trying to sell the chips, and there's a reader in the shelf that reads all of the chips on the containers, and it could read any kind of information that would be desired to put in the chip, so it knows when the container's put there, it knows expiration dates, and just a litany of things of whatever the manufacturer would want to convey to the database regarding the ingredients in the container. Now here is a grocery cart. You want me to knock that bug off the thing? Is that bothering anybody? Is it? Well, we'll let him go over there. Yeah. Unfortunately, if it smells over there, can't help that. Grocery cart. All of the groceries in this cart have an RFID chip in it. You don't literally have to go through the checkout anymore. And this is old information. This has been around a long time. All you have to do is just walk out and they'll electronically deduct the credits from your bank account and put it into the grocery store bank account. We have smart refrigerators. Part of the stimulus money was to encourage you to buy a smart appliance. Smart refrigerators is just one of them. It's intended to communicate with your smart meter, your electric meter on your house. I don't know if y'all are familiar with that yet or not. But at any rate, if you don't have carbon credits and the proper ecological footprint, it would turn off your refrigerator or any one of your other electrical appliances in order to bring you into compliance with the regulations. Now, a smart refrigerator recognizes what's been put in it, recognizes when things are removed, creates an automatic shopping list, notifies you when things are past the expiration date, and shows you possible recipes from what is in the refrigerator. That is just some of the selling points of that smart refrigerator. Now, I was talking to an individual that sells RFID chips, and he said that you could actually put one on a gallon of ice cream and determine if it had gone over the allowable temperature for that particular piece of, for that ice cream. And it would notify you when you put it in there that it should be disposed of. Likewise, if you pulled out a frozen item and put it beside your smart stove, it would read that chip and preset everything and tell you how long it had to be in there to cook it so that it would be adequate for your health, because we want to protect your health. Now, you also have smart washing machines. It would read out, all of the labels and tell you whether you've mismatched things and what needs to go in the washing machine. I was actually telling a woman about this that works at the Montgomery Legislative Office, and she said, I can't wait to get all of that. And I thought she was going to back up and say, no, I don't, but it didn't work that way. Now, here is a slide that shows the whole process that I've just gone through. We have the manufacturer and the shipment as it goes to the grocery store, and it's picked up and then goes to the individual's home, and then it goes into the recycle bin. Well, I just think about that gallon of ice cream that you put in the refrigerator, and you're notified now that it's got to be disposed of, so that great big database in the sky says, I'm looking for it to be disposed of in the trash can. And if it's not disposed of, I have no idea whether a code enforcement officer would come by or whether a medical officer would come by to see if you're in good health or how this might work its way through the system. But I was in Chattanooga not too long ago, and there was an individual who is a direct descendant of Davy Crockett, and his name is Davy Crockett, and he was at the time the Director of Sustainability for the city of Chattanooga. In his presentation, he made the comment about triple bottom line, because we have to be measured in those three aspects: social, economic, and environmental. And I said, during the Q&A, I asked him, how does a RFID chip factor into the triple bottom line? And he said, oh, and I thought he actually would back up because he was actually in hostile territory, because this was a Tea Party presentation that he had actually asked to come and speak to. Well, he didn't back up. He said, he just kind of puffed up and he said, oh, well, we're already doing experiments with readers on trash cans so that we can determine when you properly dispose of containers and recycle, and we can give you credits. So it's just a wonderful, warm, fuzzy thing that we're doing here. Urban growth boundaries, you have UDA's, what is it, UDA in Virginia?
Urban Development
Urban Development Area.
UDA.
UDA. So we actually have three labels for this. The one, urban growth boundary, is actually in another document from the state of Minnesota, and it's described in that document, From Policy to Reality, Model Ordinances for Sustainable Development. Urban growth boundary sounds rather restrictive, so we've changed the name, which is, you'll find, is very applicable to the Hegelian dialectic. We now have utility service area. So instead of saying, I'm not going to provide you with services such as electricity and water and road maintenance and other things beyond this line, we now say, I'm going to provide all of those things inside the utility area. So it kind of puts, the glass is half full instead of it's half empty situation. Just makes you feel better about what we're doing to you. Well, in this particular situation, the land value on the outside of the UGB actually becomes worthless, because you can't find anybody that's going to buy a parcel of land with no utilities and no occupancy certificate. Of course, on the inside, because we now have a shortage of land that's available for the free market, we have an escalation in price. This is a socialist agenda trying to equal out the social justice aspect of property ownership, essentially, is what we're talking about. Well, in Portland, where this has been going on for a very long time, we have examples now of what happens after this agenda has been in operation for a while. This home was probably built in the 1950s, a rather comfortable home, nice, spacious. sold for $154,000. And because the land now is so valuable, this house was torn down, and in its place were these houses. There were actually 6 houses built there, 16 foot wide, and these are entry-level homes at $150,000 a pop. So you can see how it affected the value of property. Now, infill, if you look at your comprehensive plan for your area, it's going to have the word infill in it. This is the city of Auburn, Alabama. This is their comp plan 2030. And that's kind of a generic term. You'll see various applications of Vision Plan 2020, and it has a number of things. They all sound the same, and they're all exactly the same, just a little bit different wording. And it says infill development is development or redevelopment in an established area of the city. And it goes on and says this might be developing a vacant lot or redeveloping an area with more intense or dense uses. Now, a lot of people have the perception that zoning protects my private property rights and maintains the value of it. We now have zoning overlays. When they put this in place, they have something called transferable development rights and or purchase of development rights. Washington County here in Virginia just recently adopted the PDRs, as it's called, purchase of development rights. And by the way, that's what Mrs. Googe was talking about. They're going to borrow money and set it aside for open space. In this case, we buy the development rights for those parcels of land outside the UGB because the people can't sell it and it becomes a marketable commodity. There's a number of different methods of doing this. One is to create actually a bank where these transferable development rights are sold. So on the inside, let's say that you were zoned for 4 apartments for a block. Well, you buy enough development rights, you could put a 10-story building. So you could have a stack and pack situation. So this is a zoning overlay, as it's called. And these are form-based zoning laws and regulations. There's a whole litany of new labels and new concepts that's coming in, and it's not designed to protect your private property rights or the value of it. It's designed to restructure society. Now, in this case, we're talking about infill. Now, we have 2 very modest homes here. I would imagine they're probably $40,000 or $50,000, maybe $60,000 at the top. But we have an example of infill. And we now are in the process of construction. And here is the proper infill for this local area. So you can, this is what happens when you have a socialist agenda. Now, the residents that live within this house have to conform with all the rules and regulations and the freedom of choice and everything else that goes along with this. Now, this is a slide I usually use to divide the subject matter, and this, I like to call this the wheel of sustainability. And it says these are just some of the linkages that relate to sustainability. And I usually make the point, and want to make it here also, that if you're an electrical engineer or working in some area of electricity, and you know that sustainable development is affecting the rules and regulations, take that information and try to alert your professional partner or anybody in the field. As a matter of fact, there's one example of where the ICC codes were adopted in a small community in Alabama. The person bought a Blockbuster video store that had gone out of business, wanted to turn it into a gymnasium where people could come and work out. Well, because the city, Sylacauga by the way, had adopted the ICC codes, they had to strip out all of the electrical lighting system. And when the owner of the property found out what had to be done, it stopped him dead in his tracks. He couldn't move forward. And here now was the electrical contractor that had already been hired, was in the process of removing or renovating the building to suit the needs of the new owner, and he couldn't go forward, and the new owner didn't have the resources to put this in place. So this is already a taking, in my view, regarding the ICC codes. Now I want to pick up on food policy and how it relates to sustainability. By the way, we need to have sermons. We need a third great awakening in this country, and we need sermons taught on what happens when you adopt the tenets of sustainability and how it relates to social health, for instance, or land use planning and what it means to your property. And property is not just the parcel of land and the rights to it. It actually has the right to breathe. That's the very beginning, because life is the very first aspect of property. Here now is a slide from Clackamas County, Oregon. We have a green ribbon committee, and we have an urban center and a metropolitan food shed around that urban center. It is intended that all of the food that is consumed in the metropolitan urban center is grown in that food shed. Anything that comes from outside is will have to face a mitigation fee. I like to call it a sin tax against Mother Earth. Here now is the Sustainable Agricultural Law for Georgia. This is HB 225. I have a full copy. This is merely a page long, not long at all, and it has the basic definition for sustainable development written into the law. This was just enacted last year, and it says we need to make sure that we can allow the future generations to meet their needs and improve the ability of, let me back up and say, to meet the needs of the present and improve the ability for future generations to meet their own needs while advancing progress toward environmental, social, and economic goals. So that incorporates the basic tenet written in 1987 of sustainable development. And Section 3 merely says that all laws and parts of laws in conflict with this act are repealed. So there is a movement now trying to remove this. For instance, how this would be applicable if a tomato was grown outside of the food shed in Alabama and shipped over the state line into the food shed for Georgia, one of the counties, then you'd have to pay some kind of tax for importing it outside of the food shed. This is an interactive map on the internet. All you have to do is click on the state. This is for the state of Tennessee. I used this when I was in Knoxville just recently, and here are some of the food policy councils that are popping up in the Tennessee area. They will write a food charter. This is the Greater Birmingham Community Food Charter, and it says access to nutritious, affordable, culturally inappropriate, and safe food is a basic human right. So we have to provide food for everyone, and no matter what the cost. We have had already several food summits in Alabama. This was for 2009. This is the Alabama Sustainable Agricultural Network. Their 990 forms are on the internet. They are funded by the federal government. They are going to Montgomery, building a coalition that have some political muscle to ask for organic certification of locally grown food. The local farmer is coming on board with this. He perceives it as some way of saving his market and protecting his livelihood, when in fact it is a way for suicide for local farmers, because there's no way that you're going to be able to keep up with all of the management practices that are required for certification of this program, and it will be, the best management practices will be something that will run him out of business over a period of time. Now, unfortunately, I didn't think to fix this. It's going to disappear. It's a handout, and I have plenty of these handouts. I'll just flash it up one more time, let you take a look at it. It's a brochure that we put together to try to explain sustainable agriculture. We can actually take our name off of the bottom of it and give you that copy. You can put a label on it and make it a handout for yourself. Anything that we've done that you think would be a handout for you, put your contact information on it and use it. Don't reinvent the wheel. There's lots of organizations doing what we're doing. You know, we don't need a lock on anything. This is not about any ego from us or any part of our organizational ego. We need to have as many people doing as much as we can in order to slow this up as best we can. Food Policy Council will create a food charter. One of the planks of that food charter would read something like this. The term food citizenship is defined as the practice of engaging in food-related behaviors that support, rather than threaten, the development of a democratic, socially, and economically just and environmentally sustainable food system. Now, to me, the point I want to make about that particular statement is sitting on the fence is something that you're not going to be allowed to do. Because if you have no opinion about this, if you're not enthusiastic about your local food shed, you're threatening your food citizenship. This next quote says that food democracy or food citizenship recognizes that consumers can identify the interest of others, and they are food workers, other consumers, future generations, that's intergenerational equity, and other species, species equity. So I'm sure that we have to make sure that the chicken feels comfortable as we're about to decapitate him. At any rate, the reason that is so very important is because it's in a thesis at Drexel University. This was an individual that was looking for a doctorate, and she was trying to impress somebody in her thesis, so she included this comment talking about food citizenship. Food charters, and this is one of your handouts, this goes into food security and what it actually means. This paragraph actually talks about greenhouse gas emissions, exploitation of resources from Mother Earth, a whole litany of things that we have to regulate, including water, so you can kind of get an idea of what a food charter and a food citizenship will mean for your local area. Social justice is frequently mentioned in all of this, and here is a definition. I went to the internet and got a definition so we could all get on the same page. Social justice is progressive taxation, income redistribution, property redistribution, equality of opportunity, and equality of outcome. So that's just nails it down. This is pure socialism. Next, with any of these programs, you have new words, and this was a new word for me. This is locavore. He is merely an individual that has dedicated his existence to consuming foods within a 100-mile radius of where he lives. And these are two articles, two magazines that have already had articles on this. This one way back in 2006. I don't know what the date on this one was, but this is the 100-mile diet is the name of it. And we have an individual that has used an ecologically friendly mode of transportation to go out into the farmland and gather his food. So he is securing a positive note on his balance sheet because he's not using gasoline that depletes the resources of Mother Earth and endangers future generations for resource extraction. Food miles, the distance that food miles in order to get to your plate. This is a poster that's intended to go up on the school wall, and I can well see that a teacher who would be the authoritative figure would be speaking to maybe a group of children 8, maybe 13 years old, and she says, oh, you should care, putting a guilt trip on these children that carrot that flew in from California degraded the environment for a little birdie on the way in. And can you imagine the birds may hatch and may never grow up to be a big bird and lighten the life of somebody in the morning by chirping. I can just see a child hearing that and thinking about it. Some of the costs that are associated with food miles that you're not currently paying, of course, would be transportation, soil degradation, irrigated related groundwater depletion, pesticide and fertilizer misuse. The USDA has declared that fertilizer is a pollutant and has to be regulated. I know some farmers that are having problems spreading chicken manure because the USDA wants to regulate it. This is another slide I'm picking up now on transportation and sustainability and how it relates to the subject. This is a slideshow that says that transportation is not an end in of itself. In other words, I thought I could just get an automobile and move from point A to point B and that was it. I didn't have to worry about anything else, but no. It goes on and says, well, we're going to support individual and collective goals in our vehicle miles traveled program. Socialism has got to be involved in this. So I went out and looked at, this is transportation funding options for the state of California, 2003 through 2022. And in this report now, it says, equity issues include income distribution, urban, rural, and regional geographic differences. And then by now you should recognize this, intergenerational equity. We've got intergenerational concerns wrapped up in this funding program for the state of South Carolina. This is 2009, and I thought this was a very colorful front page for this report. The Department of Transportation for the state of Tennessee actually put this report together. And this report is compiled and written by the elite class of 2008. So we get together the leaders that are involved in this field, and they're the ones that actually put this together. Now here's what they had to say. The first approach starts with the premise that we need to convince you to change the way you live. And that primary objective of this approach is to reduce VMTs, vehicle miles traveled, by restructuring society such that your needs for work, shopping, personal and social services, as well as recreation, can be met in our community by driving only short distances, walking or biking near your home. So that's pretty much how we're going to restructure everything. When you hear a federal, especially a federal official, talk about VMTs and offering you options, they're going to be walking, bicycle, and public transportation. Never mentions any other way of moving from point A to point B. Now here is, I'm only going to pull up one quote from Agenda 21. This is Chapter 40. It's actually 40.4. And it says, commonly used indicators such as gross national product and measurements of individual resource flows or pollution flows do not provide adequate indications of sustainability. We can't, 1992, we can't look at you in a real-time basis and determine how much of Mother Earth's resources you're exploiting. So we need to, in this next sentence, create indicators of sustainable development in order to provide a solid basis for decision-making at all levels of government and contribute to a self-regulating sustainable system. Now, remember in the beginning I was talking about a governance system is the rules and regulations that determine how you interact within society. So now here is an example, the best example I've been able to find. This is the logo for the I-95 Coalition. And of course, I-95 runs from Maine all the way to Florida. It is all of the transportation's authority in that area, including some in Canada. There's a total of 35. And here now is the label for this particular report. This is 34 pages long. Multi-state VMT-based fee institutional and legal analysis. In this report, it says that we're going to take the information from your computer on your automobile, which has a GPS tracking device in it, and when you go to the gas station to buy a tank of gasoline, the information is transferred to that great big database in the sky, and it determines where you were and when you were there. In other words, if you drove through an ecologically sensitive area and there was a little birdie that was endangered, and you of course have furthered the endangerment of that species, then you would have to pay a mitigation fee for having driven through that area. Or perhaps you have driven through a socially unjust area and we need extra taxes to make up for the terrible situation that these people have been in for so many generations. In order to do that, now you've got to pay that mitigation fee. Now this particular document goes in and says, well, there may be some local officials that would not want to buy into this. My opinion is that we have a degrading environmental situation, not environmental, but economic situation currently. And it's not going to get better. So this is a way to extract money from you without enacting an ordinance. Nobody's going to lay a hand on you. You're not even going to have a chance to know that it was done probably. And you'll have to pay that fee right then if you want to get the gasoline. And all the local official has to do is hold out his hand and Uncle Sam or some consortium is going to put a check in it. So I think it's a done deal. There's no worry at all about instituting this. Let me pick up now on plan use planning and greening development and how it interacts with the Biodiversity Treaty. And here now is the Southeast Ecological Framework. All of the green area that you see is no human intrusion zone, 10% buffer zone, and 40% of the remaining land mass is where we're going to be allowed to live. Now this also says that all of the species of plant and animals that were brought here by European man are invasive species and have to be removed. All of the predator animals that European man have done away with or were here when he came have to be reintroduced. So I do know that there are farmers that have had their cattle and their other wild livestock that have been destroyed on account of animals that did not exist when I was a young man. They have in fact been reintroduced. This particular slideshow was created by the EPA Region 4 out of Atlanta. We have here an Eco Hub, which is intended to be 5,000 acres or larger. Could be 1 acre. It could be that a stakeholder committee would come out to your small parcel of land and say, oh, that's a Eco Hub, a wetland in and of itself, and you need to protect it. So we're going to have to make sure that you don't build anything on here or don't disturb any of the little critters that may be alive in that particular acre of land or even smaller. Well, we also have an interconnecting corridor that runs from this Eco Hub to this Eco Hub over here. We want the animals and predator animals that may be in one eco hub to be able to move through this interconnecting corridor, never seeing any structure created by man, never knowing that man was ever on this earth. The concept behind this high-thinking PhD type of thought says that we want to have the animals to move from one eco hub to the other so that they don't degrade their gene pool by intermating over the next 1,000-year period. And that 1,000 years is quite interesting, to me at any rate, because I know that Hitler was setting up his regime to last 1,000 years. At any rate now, here is that interconnecting corridor. This is another government slide. I didn't create this one. This interconnecting corridor has a black line. I would imagine that might be as wide as 2 acres, maybe even larger. Just depends on what the stakeholder committee might want to designate. And it says, linear features linking core areas wind through human-dominated land like agriculture or development, and it allows animal, seed, pollen movement between the core areas. And down at the bottom it says, linkages calculated separately between forest, wetland, and aquatic core areas. If you look at the map for Virginia that has just been published this past June, we'll look at some of the areas that I have here for, unfortunately I didn't get this specific area. The area on the coast of Virginia is an aquatic core area. The Coral Sea is designated as an aquatic core area for Australia, and they don't allow them to fish in that area. So this is going to have far-reaching implications. Now here is Richmond, Virginia, and when I punch the button, you'll see how much land is set aside. And this, by the way, was published middle of last year by your Department of Resources. All of the colored area is no human intrusion zones or non-human intrusion zones. In the Southeast Ecological Framework, they use shades of green. The purple that you see here is actually the interconnecting corridor from one core area to the other. And these are the maps that the state of Virginia has produced matching what the federal government is requesting. So you can see how much land is set aside for animals. This one is Pulaski, and you can see how much land is set aside in that area. Going on further now, here is Washington County, and you can see how much land is set aside. And actually, there's a pretty good bit of white area in this particular. Of course, we may relocate people from Richmond, Virginia down here. I don't know how that might work. This is now Habitat 2. Remember, we're talking about Global Plan of Actions. It's not just Agenda 21. This is 1996 Habitat 2. And this is the graphics from that particular conference. And notice Mother Earth is gently caressing and protecting human settlements. So this speaks volumes about what the concept is behind this Habitat agenda. Now this is, the quote I'm going to pull up is actually from Habitat 1, 1976. And it says, land, because of its unique nature and crucial role it plays in human settlements, cannot be treated as an ordinary asset controlled by you, the individual, and subject to the pressures and inefficiencies of the market. So right there in that very first sentence, we don't want the free enterprise system because it's absolutely inefficient. Private land ownership is also a principal instrument of accumulation and concentration of wealth, and therefore contributes to social injustice. So if you made a crying dime off a parcel of land, you committed an act of social injustice. Now, if we leave this alone, if we allow this to continue or unchecked, it may become a major obstacle in the planning and implementation of development schemes. Social justice, urban renewal, and development, the provisions of decent dwellings and healthy conditions for the people can only be achieved if land is used in the interest of society as a whole. And the very last sentence says, public control of land is therefore indispensable. So we have to do away with private ownership of private property in order to institute and implement our scheme of social justice. Now, that was their definition of what ownership of private property is. Now, this is Joe Neal here on this side of this label, and I have several of those back there. If you want more, take more and pass them around. Joe Neal is the representative, I think, from Richland County, South Carolina, and he now is going to tell you what is the purpose of private property rights.
What we're facing is a plan for growth and development that's being implemented by County Council here called Vision 2020. It is a flavor or a type of smart growth legislation. And what that simply means is that a vision has been developed by planners for this area. They want to dictate how growth will occur or not occur in this area. And by that result, who will profit or not profit by that plan. And what this plan does, very simply, is to lay out a vision of this area that includes the evolution or creation of villages. They want to force all growth in this area into villages, high density, high population villages. Around these villages will be drawn what are called urban boundary zones. These urban boundary zones will delineate the village from the surrounding countryside. And those two entities, the village and the countryside, will be treated differently by this legislation. Property that is not in the village will find that it is lessened, reduced, or eliminated. Property within the village will find that that property will gain or rise in value because that's the only place where development will be allowed to occur. Now, as an example, recently we had a resident here who put in an application to build a barber shop in his little community. He happened to own some property on the side of a highway in a rural area here. He was told that he could not. That instead, if he wanted the barber shop, he had to go into the little village nearby, a little community, it wasn't even a village, and purchase a site there or negotiate with someone who already has a site to allow him to put up a barber shop. Now, what that did was to render his property useless. The purpose in owning property is to find some way to make that property produce wealth, whether it's growing a crop or putting a small business on it. For rural people, particularly in this area, who have never had the opportunity to translate their holdings into wealth, to be told at this point that that can never happen, that they will be denied access to water and sewer, that the only place that water and sewer will be able to go will be in the villages that are designated by this plan. That's the problem. It creates a two-tiered system of people and societies here. Those who are in the village will be allowed to accumulate wealth, their property will rise in value. Those of us who are in the rural areas who are not in the village will find that the property values are dropping, that we're not allowed to do anything with the property practically that will produce any wealth. That robs these property owners of wealth. It's a takings, in my opinion, because of that.
Well, I agree with him. It absolutely is a taking. Now, how do you get people to accept the concept of property rights and that the fact that if you own a parcel of land and you make some money off of it, that it's an act of social injustice? Well, here is in a few minutes, I'm going to show you an example of how you actually create a community that might accept this. Now, these organizations, and these are just two, there's several organizations that are pushing for the concept of earth rights. In other words, Mother Earth is a living entity and we have to protect her from the ravages of man. This has already been written into the Constitution for the country of Bolivia, and this is the Earth Rights Institute. They are pushing for that concept along with Global Eco Village and Sustainable Community Network. They also, all of the Earth rights, including many more tenets, are written into something called the Earth Charter. Now here are future citizens of this community.
Care for land
of course, I believe there'll be adequate citizenships and recognize their food citizenship as long, and many of the other things that will be a litany test of what's required for citizenship in that community. Remember at the beginning I talked about this was a religion, and I hope that this particular slide will drive that point home. At some layer of this implementation, I know we have people that are just useless idiots that are implementing it. Some levels we have people that are making money, and then at some level we have the people that reflect the ideology of the 30s and 40s of World War II. And I think these people that now created this Ark of Hope would qualify for that category. This is intended to be a copy of the Ark of the Covenant. It has 4 eyes on either side where you slide the poles through so that you actually don't have to touch the box itself. It had the Earth Charter inside. The Earth Charter contained all of those things that those young children were singing about Mother Earth. It was made from one tree in Germany, shipped over to the New England area, and hand carried down to the meditation room, where this is the photograph of that box sitting in on the pedestal in the meditation room. Gorbachev had this to say about the Earth Charter. He says, "My hope is the Charter will be a kind of 10 Commandments, a Sermon on the Mount that provides a guide for human behavior toward the environment in the next century." So this truly, in my mind, in my viewpoint, is a religion. Now, I'm getting close to the end here. Here is the National Environmental Policy Act. If you want to know what this graphic is all about, I have a brief explanation of the 2 graphics that I use in prior presentations that you can go and look at. It is essentially the structure of society April the 18th of 1775, because the king actually owned everything. It was on the authority of the church, and the people agreed with that particular situation. April the 19th of 1775, the people said, no, there is only one king but King Jesus. And from that action of that day, the authority of the King of England devolved into every individual in this country. We have all of his authority bestowed on us because of the actions of our forefathers. Now, this National Environmental Policy Act completely reverses this concept, and we haven't understood that we need to have a written rebuttal against this. We really need to send to our elected officials a rebuttal stating this is not indeed the policy of a constitutional government. I'm only going to quote one partial section. This is about 2 pages long. You need to go out and look at it. It holds the tenets of sustainable development way back in 1969. It says that the federal government's responsibility is to ensure for all Americans safe, healthful, productive, and aesthetically and culturally pleasing surroundings. So that's what the country is now set about, what our national government is trying to do to us. Well, I think that the National Environmental Policy Act ought to go where the Bible used to go. Agenda 21 is merely a milestone along this path. It ought to undergird that philosophy. The Council on Environmental Quality. Go out to the President's website. On the top of his website, you'll see a series of tabs. On the right-hand side is the tab that takes you to the Council on Environmental Quality, and that council is set up by NEPA, and they are the ones, again, that set up the criteria whether or not a bird has more authority, more rights than you do. I think that ought to go where the church is, or used to be. Of course, the president should actually go where the king used to be, and we now have the Office of Criminal Code Enforcement for EPA. That's another agency under this system. And of course, you've already seen the Environmental Police Force. Well, if you've already got that, can you think that, or wouldn't you think that the political code enforcement officer might not be very far behind? So he ought to go there. And then we have Congress. Well, what has Congress done? Absolutely nothing. It's just a subservient organization in this organizational chart. Coming down to the very end now, here is what is government. And this is the best definition I have seen for a proper definition for government, and it says properly constituted under God's law. Government is a transfer of specific rights and obligations, those designated by the people, to an entity called government. government becomes a corporation, a legal fiction, an idea that is described in a written format. The written document is a charter, a contract, a constitution that contains the mission statement that spells out the purpose of government. Well, now for the state of Alabama, there is a mission statement. And here it is, Article 1, Section 35. The sole object and only legitimate end of government is not to look forward into the future, determine how many future generations are going to need resources, and then distribute those resources across that timeline. It is not to look at this generation and determine the redistribution adequately and equitably among this generation, nor include species equity. The purpose of government is to protect the citizen in the enjoyment of life, liberty, and property. Now, that phrase would have been well known by the people of the 1700s because it was coined by John Locke. He was the third most quoted individual in the founding era. I have a book of sermons where the pastors of the time speak of the magnificent John Locke. Well, it so happens that Jefferson came along and decided that that phrase was redundant. So he said, well, if you've got life, or if you don't have life, there can be no property. So in that facet, it is redundant. So he substituted pursuit of happiness. And that's the phrase now we've grown up with. Well, I'm going to pose a thought to you that if government will not protect the first aspect of property, among the most innocent among us, they certainly are not going to protect your private property as an adult. Well, what happens when government assumes other functions? It is merely usurpation and oppression. So that's essentially the presentation on Agenda 21.
The Amana colonies in Iowa.
Yes.
Are you familiar with those?
Yes.
It's basically what you've been talking about.
Right.
And through the evolution of the country, they've dissipated back into a regular functioning community now.
Mm-hmm. Let me speak about the Amana colony and other people that want to do this voluntarily is fine with me. It's when they ask for regulations that require me to have higher electrical rates or turn my light off or do whatever they want to. It's a socialist agenda and I don't appreciate that. So, but I applaud any community that wants to have a sustainable community. As a matter of fact, some of the people in Hohenwald, Tennessee were saying, well, that's not us. You know, that we're wanting to be sustainable in a different manner. And I made the comment to them, I said, well, you've allowed your label and your body of people to be used towards another agenda, and by not defining by what you mean regarding sustainable development, you're participating in furthering this agenda, and they did agree with that. So, sir.
A comment and a question. The comment is, I got a kick out of the picture of the new narrow skinny house in the urban infill area in between the two $50,000 houses. But I was surprised that it had a full width garage. I would have thought it would have been a 3-foot garage where you could have a bicycle to come up the driveway.
Well, while that's true, we don't want to really tell everybody what this is all about up front. You know, if you just have a bicycle rack in the front.
That's a tip-off.
That's a tip-off, right. So.
And a question, what universities are churning out or have churned out the folks who have written all this
well, there's one that comes to mind right off the bat is University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. All the way back into the late 90s, they have had a course to teach facilitators and change agents in sustainable development. Their syllabus is online. You can go look them up. Part of that program requires the participants in that process to go out into the community and try to change attitudes towards a specific project and then come back and report on it in order to qualify for a change agent. So that, I mean, just look up sustainable development in Vanderbilt University, University of Alabama, Auburn. I mean, they're all just involved in this so heavily, it's just unbelievable. And I rather think they're the moving and motivating factor in society more than government, because they churn out people that profess to be conservatives, and yet they'll maybe go into politics or some other field, and they'll adopt all of these rules and regulations because that's what they've been taught.
You know, the guy that Sandy and I went to this food center, we were sitting next to this guy from
James Madison University. He's studying sustainable engineering.
Yes.
I mean, it's right here in your backyard.
Any, Charles?
Yeah, I have a couple questions and comments. On that virtual Alabama, is that a proposal or is that actually?
No, that's it's already in use.
From what you showed, it looked like it was a mixture of information that could be collected from ground penetrating radar to
Yes.
show utility lines and stuff like
Yes.
that. Plus, when they showed schools, it looked like it was a combination of databases. You know, it had information from databases that showed floor plans for schools and other facilities like this. So is that in fact what it is? It combines-
That's my understanding. As to whether or not they can actually, I have been told that the radar can actually look at the furniture arrangement in your house. As to whether or not that's true, I don't know. But it would not surprise me, because this is a number of years old, and all I did was pull out excerpt. There's a lot of fluff and advertisement kind of going. It's about a 5-minute video that I cut it down to about half.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking if it can see the arrangement of furniture, I saw the, what it could see in the school, right?
Yeah.
If it can see that, it can see what you're doing in your house too.
Well, if it can see the pipe underground, certainly it could look through your roof and determine where the chair is, I guess.
Well, where you are in the house.
Certainly.
Well, what occurred to me is that, well, another question is, who has access to that database? Does the public have access to it? Or
To answer your question, honestly, I don't know.
Okay.
But I'm sure that the local communities would have access to it. Any EMA, Emergency Management Authority, would have access, I would
It
think.
just occurred to me when I saw that floor plan for a school, that's the kind of thing a terrorist could make use of.
Oh, sure.
Or for other facilities. I don't know who's thinking about those.
Pipelines would be the ideal thing. If
sorry?
a pipeline carrying, petroleum across the country. I mean, we have one that runs from New Orleans all the way up the East Coast.
Yeah, I'm just wondering how that information is treated, but it occurs to me that, unauthorized people had access.
Oh, well.
Yeah, I had a couple I was wondering about the range on those RFIDs, in terms of what can be picked up. Do you know that? Is it a technical
Yeah,
question?
well, I've, of course, I don't remember the statistics, but the RFID chips that are powered can go certainly across a warehouse.
So there's some that are passive, I assume.
The passive has no battery or no power source internal, so that's your currency. And I don't know, and I don't know about the newest development in these. I don't know, but I know that they are the grain of rice or smaller. So.
The other thing that occurred to me, one of the things that I found scary was that food policy choices. And if you made a choice that somehow threatened democracy or social justice, and then the question of, okay, well, who's going to determine what threatens democracy? Because that was one of the things, I think that may have been from somebody's dissertation, but that reminds me very much of, there was an article it was famous in the Soviet Union, and it was basically anti-Soviet activities. And that's how they could be whatever they wanted it to be.
Right.
And that's what's kind of scary about some of this stuff, that if they start having penalties and somebody decides what is it that threatens democracy in your food choice, and there's going to be a penalty, that really sounds like what went on in the Soviet Union, where you could be charged for under an article that was literally anti-Soviet activities, and they could make it be whatever they wanted it to be.
Those laws are still apparently on the book, because there was some rock and roll band that was making fun of Putin, and they were convicted on the charge of hooliganism, which was a Soviet charge, and locked away for I don't know how long, but so the old Soviet Union is still in the new federation.
I'll give you the name of a Soviet child who was turned into a hero. His name was, I'll write his name down, but when you had the slide about people turning each other in for environmental, for code violations and stuff, you might want this slide, because his name was Pavlik Morozov. I think it was probably in the 1930s, but he turned his parents in. He informed on his parents, and they were arrested. And he was made into a hero. There's statues to him. I'll write down his name. You might want to have a slide in there to show.
Well, now that reminds me that I've done some reading on the French Revolution, and that was the first communist revolution, and you actually had to carry around a handwritten endorsement the new regime, and that you enthusiastically endorse the new regime. So that it wasn't the Germans, where are your papers? It was the French that really started all this. Now, there was an assemblyman that wanted to demonstrate his enthusiastic support of the new regime ideology, and he brought a toe sack in and threw it on the table that contained the heads of his mother and father.
Yeah.
So he was fully on board with this.
Yeah.
One thing that kind of scares me about this whole thing with this chip situation, it would be very easy. They're trying to get this chip thing that would be implanted in you to read your medical history.
Oh yeah. Why wouldn't you want to do that? I mean, we're trying to protect your health.
Yeah.
And when you have high blood pressure, we can monitor your high blood pressure for you. And should you get high and maybe have a stroke, we could send the EMA to protect you.
Well, the situation would be is how hard would it be to incorporate into that chip a tracking device to figure out where you're going, what you're doing?
Well,
for
it's already there for Alzheimer's. Yeah, and it's already in your phone, but obviously for Alzheimer's patients, we need to track them so they don't get lost and hurt themselves.
Yep.
So, and this is the map now where I extracted those clips. This is produced by the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources for the state of Tennessee, and you'll notice the aquatic core area. And the legend for this is right here and goes through all the various colors, and all of this from red to that off yellow, yellow, green, and dark green are all core areas. And then of course land that is outside of it is this particular shade right here. Everything else is kind of boundaries. This is your interconnecting corridor color. So you can kind of see how the state is divided up. Now, my advice to everyone here, if you want this information, go out and get it now, because there is one site associated with this where you put the base map and then you overlay the red or overlay whatever you want to. But that doesn't work. I tried to get the maps because it would be proportional. In other words, I could pull up and do a screenshot of the base map and then overlay various aspects of this legend, and I wouldn't have to worry with getting the roads in the right place and that kind of thing. And it would also have labels of the various communities, but it doesn't work. Now the data sets are available so that if you want to go out and have the software, GIS software, that would allow you to do that, you can get the raw material and then use that. Now Charles, you may know somebody that can do that. I think that would be very advisable. I did go ahead and download everything I thought I could use regarding this, and the definitions of the interconnecting corridor and the echo hubs and all that is on the website and describes all of the things that I have gone through here already. So this is the Department of Natural Resources for the state of Virginia. And the reason I say that is because the EPA has pulled the maps that I was using off the internet, and now I can't go back and get other maps that I use for the other southeastern states. So that's why I'm saying get this information while you can, because if groups in Virginia begin to talk about this, they'll pull this off the internet likely.
My dad has a dairy farm that has a creek that runs through it, and it's just, out northern part of Augusta County. And they come in and told him that he has to fence off this little creek, and they've done it, neighbors up and down.
Right.
And it's hardly, most of the time it's dry. It's not even running much anymore. But if you think about what you're talking about, the land values, that's going to affect the value, because that's a long strip that runs through that property, cuts off one side of the farm from the other, for one thing. And, it's just... It's a ridiculous thing.
It is almost beyond the realm of average individual in society to believe that this is happening and how far it's gone.
Right.
And nobody's speaking of the unintended consequences.
What can you do to fight that? I mean, it's like he's got these people coming out.
Well, there are actual things that you can do. One of them would be to put up a no trespass sign. And this is for Alabama, and there are maximum of laws. Now, do you know what a maximum of law is? It is a correct and proper statement that is long-standing. As long as, there's probably 1,500 maximum of laws that exist. They are frequently well-worded, that are easy to memorize and that kind of thing, that have been used in law, and where they're applicable, they're not refutable. Now, this sign has a maximum of law, and it says, "Every home is a castle. Though the winds of heaven blow through it, officers of the state cannot enter." That's a maximum of law that came down from England to us, and we don't understand that our private property is a castle, and we can restrict the officers of the state from coming onto our private property. But because we allow it to be defined as personal or real, we don't understand the significance of that, and then their code applies to our property. We have to begin to understand those terms again and reapply them in order to reassert our rights rather than privileges under this system. Let me say one thing. If you do put this up, of course you want to follow the state statutes of how it should be put up. Now in Alabama, I don't know of any requirement that you have to put it up on the four corners of your property and then every so many feet. In Tennessee, I think that's true. So if you create a sign like this, of course you're going to want to put the code from Virginia, and you want to follow all the codes. And what we say or advise people that are thinking about this is to take a newspaper and hold it up beside the sign and take a photograph of that. That gives documentation as to when the sign was actually posted. So then you notarize that statement and you send it to any elected official that may have charge to send a code enforcement officer or any other agent to your property, noticing them that your property is posted private, and he needs to notify you should he desire to come onto your property. Now the reason for that is that the code enforcement officers in Florida have torn the sign down. There was no documentation, and it was the owner's word against the code enforcement that it was ever there. So this gives you further standing in court should someone come to your property and you can claim that there was criminal trespass, whereas otherwise you couldn't.
Okay, what do you do with the farmer that's dealing with the Google Earth satellite, checking out your property every day to make sure your manure is covered, that your cows are where they're supposed to be? They're not going to see the trespassing sign. They just beam.
Right, and they're gonna want to come onto your property to inspect. Well, the very first thing is you're going to want to know where their jurisdictional authority is to come onto your property. After all, they're an agent of the federal government. They're not an agent of the state government, and there's a jurisdictional fence there. And if we begin to understand the difference between, and I probably should pull up the slides, but in most of the state constitutions, it says "we the people," and it is a small p, common noun. There are some anomalies. Tennessee is one of them. Virginia is not. It says "we the people," and you don't have a preamble in your state constitution. We do in ours, and it says "we the people," and it goes on and describes our Bill of Rights and other things in our state constitution. Now, the authority of the king devolved into the common people. That references the common people because it's a common noun. And you go to the federal constitution, it says "we the people," a capital P. That doesn't reference you and I. That references the agents of the state government. There were 13 original free and independent states that came into existence in the Treaty of Paris. Those 13 states sent their representatives, who are reflected in the language of "we the people," and they represent the state governments, created a government of the United States for a specific territory, which is 10 miles square, that resides in Washington, D.C. It is the military post, and the needful buildings that are required to maintain all of that is their jurisdiction. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 and 18 says that the federal government has all authority to write rules and regulations for the people of the United States, and that's 10 mile square area. When Roberts wrote that the United States could force someone into buying something, he wasn't talking about the people that live in the Commonwealth or the people that live in the Republic, Alabama. He was talking about the people that live in Washington, D.C. He made a proper ruling. But since we don't understand the meaning of commas and colons and capitalization in legal documents, we think that it applies to us.
So Google Earth can only be used by the federal government? I mean,
Google Earth can be used by anybody that has access to the information.
But then so you're saying that the state can't utilize that and
This-
just go ahead and fine you based on Google Earth?
Well, the thing is that in Article 1, Section 9 of the Alabama Code, it says that the Code of Alabama shall not affect the right, remedy, or defense of the citizens of the state of Alabama. So we can write all the codes we want to determine the manure on your property from livestock and where it is, but if you have a right to private property, we can't affect that because your private property is a separate jurisdiction from that of the state. Remember, the authority of the king devolved into the people. We have that private jurisdiction. And the state, just like this says, the state doesn't have the authority to come into your jurisdiction and affect anything that you do, as long as it's a right. But now if we extend a privilege to you, that's a different story. And because the definition found in the first section of the Alabama Code defines property as personal or real, and we don't understand that our property is not personal or real, and we allow it to be defined as that, then we allow the code to be applied to our private property. And we need to begin to make the distinction again that property is private. Now, the best example of how to explain that, I think, is one Supreme Court case that was held in, or was presented in the 1960s. There was an individual that was being followed by the FBI, and he went into a phone booth in a mall and he closed the door. As we all know, the young man here may not know what a phone booth is. Phone booths had glass walls in it. You could see through a phone booth. And the FBI wiretapped him and used the information in the case against him and won a conviction. He took it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that he had a reasonable expectation of privacy when he closed the door, and therefore the agent of the government could not see into his jurisdiction. Now, let me, and I usually go through the slides, but since I'm here, let me talk about it a little more. In our system that was established April the 19th of 1775, which was by action of people, it was not something that anybody sat down and wrote about. It was later that the actions of people had to be reflected in the legal writings. Now, what occurred is that we placed Jesus in the place of the earthly king. The grantor was God the Father, and we are the beneficiary. Those rights are extended to us and are unalienable, meaning that the entity of government does not have the authority to place a lien against that which the Creator has granted to us. You disavow that and you're saying, I am no longer an American, because that is a concept published in the first document of the American people. It is not an opinion that I hold, and it is self-evident. In other words, I don't have to tell you, all you got to do is look around. This thing is created by someone that has a far greater reach than we can imagine. He is the architect of the universe, and he has bestowed each and every one of us with certain unalienable rights. If you go to the French Revolution and look up their rights, they are inalienable, inherent rights. And our system taught that the only thing inherent in man is a sinful and degenerate nature. Now, if you follow the inalienable right concept, you will find that the United Nations use it every time they talk about rights. It's inalienable. And those rights, by legal definition, are those rights which you can give away. I can't give away what the Creator has granted to me. Neither can I transfer that right. But I can transfer certain obligations to an entity called government and expect them to uphold that which the Creator has granted to me. Now, I can't see into the jurisdiction of God the Father. I can't even see His footstool. So, the entity that we have created as stated in that Supreme Court case, and as stated right there, the agent can't see into our jurisdiction because we are its creators. Now, as long as I don't affect the rights of any of the other people, and by the way, I'm not saying the code doesn't affect us, because if I violate the rights of another individual, that person has the perfect obligation or responsibility to go to our government and in an affidavit say, I have had my rights violated by my neighbor, I want you to look into this, I have a witness that has come forward, and here now is the law that he violated, the damage I suffered, and an unbiased witness. Look into it, government agent. It goes right back to Romans 13, verse 4, 5, or 6. And the government then has a responsibility to look into the tenets of this and determine whether or not there is validity in it, and then cause me to make the situation right. Now that's the system we have, and we've got to begin to learn how to reassert that system so that it's no longer a commercial enterprise between us and them, and they're extracting fees and everything else from us.
Now, can you explain that when you say assert, that's a legal concept, latches and things like that?
Well, for instance, the comprehensive plan is a policy statement. And if we don't assert that it violates our rights extended to us from the Creator, it stands. And if, for instance, in adverse possession, the Supreme Court of Alabama says that if you possess a parcel, the rights to a parcel of land for 20 years, no one has the authority to come and rebut or object to those title to that property. So in this case, if we allow a comprehensive plan, which obviously incorporates sustainable development and violates the rights granted to us by the Creator, after a period of time, let the dog lie, is the saying. And we have no authority to come and rebut or object to what has been on the books for a long time. I hope that's Charles.
I was just going to say, to comment on the Google Earth issue, just as a practical matter, and I don't know how this plays out, legally or constitutionally, but if you look at the history of the images, I mean, that image was taken at a particular time on a particular day, and if you go back and look at the history for a particular location, you'll see that those intervals are fairly far apart. So I don't know, an image of your property may have been months ago. I don't know how, what that legal right that gives somebody to comment. If you had an uncovered manure pile, or, on a certain day months ago, I don't know if they could use that as justification to come inspect or investigate. I'm not a legal person, but just as a practical matter, the satellite doesn't cover every piece of territory in the earth every day. So those images are going to be older, and I don't know what that legal standing or protection that gives you.
Right. Now let me say, I'm not a lawyer. I don't give legal advice. What we're talking about here is my personal opinion, my private opinion, because I don't want it to be allowed the system to label me a person, because a person can be a corporation. And of course we know that the rights, or not rights, but privileges are extended to a corporation. A human soul has rights, doesn't have privileges extended to it by government. So I want to kind of make that distinction. And I want to briefly talk about this individual from Albertville, Alabama, who was actually charged with harboring insects, and kind of go over, because the ICC now has promulgated rules and regulations, and there's all kind of problems associated with this, and we don't know. We're so ignorant in our society, we don't know how to rebut or what to do when we receive a affidavit from the code enforcement officer. Now, this is, just so you know, these are photographs taken by the code enforcement officer when he charged this person with having a public nuisance on his property. Now, he has private property. Can a public nuisance exist on private property? And I would say, when presented with that blunt question, most people would say, no, I don't think it can. Well, that's true, it can. But we never, in this case, got to the question of whether or not a public nuisance can and does exist on private property. I'm going to kind of cut this thing short. This is a copy of the affidavit that was left on the front door of this man's home in Albertville. Now, there is a handout over there that Dana has, so get a copy of it and you can take it home and read it. It essentially says that you, the owner of the property, have 7 days to rebut my statements, the code enforcement officer's statement. And it's his signature, Mr. Dick Adams, right down there at the bottom, signed this thing and put it on his front door. Now, we all know that a lot of people use the front door, never use the front door, they go in the back door. It just so happens this man happened to have gone in the front door and found this stuck to the front door. If he had waited 7 days and never found it, he would have been guilty. Because it says right here in this paragraph, if you don't rebut what we're asserting in 7 days, you're guilty, you waive all rights to an appeal, and here's your fine. The fine is $500, or we'll just give you 6 months in jail, or both. And then if you don't pay it, well, we're going to put a lien against your property and sell it, satisfy the lien. That's what it says. So what does the average person do? They don't read it. Very first thing, they'll go down, they'll set up a court date in an administrative court, and the judge will gavel out and say, your fine is so-and-so, but you haven't even heard my case. Well, he probably didn't read this and understand it. He didn't understand that if he didn't rebut in 7 days, he's guilty. He's not there to have his case heard. He's there to determine what his fine is. And this is the whole gist of the whole thing. And this is contract law. This is not a public violation. This is not a criminal law. It's a contract that is presented to the private property owner, and because we don't know how to rebut it, we wind up paying that fine. Well, now in this case, let me go back and pick up on how this thing actually worked out. Let's see. Well, that's the definition for government. And here now, man is a created being. Man created the state governments, and then the state governments created the federal government. These are very distinct jurisdictions. And these are legal fictions, these two right here. They have no authority. They're the same thing as a corporation. They can't speak. They're dead. They're written down on a piece of paper. It has to have an officer to come forward and make the statement. So there's no parity between these. So when you put the name in all caps, then there's parity. And I'm kind of not going over this real quick like. A legal fiction is a corporation. It does not exist beyond the imagination of its creators. Therefore, it cannot interact with a soul. It requires a responsible party, a living soul to stand and make the accusation. So if you receive a statement from the code enforcement officer, he's the agent of the principal. There has to be an officer for the corporate body of the city or county to sign on the dotted line and make the accusation against you. Because if you go to court and you want the city of Albertville or the city of Roanoke to come and make a statement, it can't sit on the stand. You got to have an officer of the corporation to come and sit on the stand so you can hear the accusations against you. And these are now some of the things that we have to begin to understand. The responsible party, living soul, must, in order to establish a controversy, and we call it the 4 legs of the controversy, or ratification of commencement. And there's only 4 things here. And a lot of times I'll go over this with a group of people, and invariably, as a matter of fact, last night I went over it, and there was a gentleman that was having legal problems, and he came up, after having gone over it 2 or 3 times, I said, did you get the 4 legs of the controversy? And he couldn't remember it. So now I'm not expecting anybody here to be able to retain all this, but it is so very important to understand. As a matter of fact, the very first time I made this particular presentation, in the morning I did Agenda 21, and I got a lady to stand up and read Matthew 5:25, because all of this is religious. Now, I'm not asking anyone here to believe in Jesus Christ. Thomas Jefferson said, I am a follower of Christ, but I'm not a believer in him. And that was because the tenets in Christianity teaches liberty and freedom. And when we apply that, whether you believe in Christ or not, you're going to have liberty and freedom in your society. So Matthew 5:25 simply says, resolve the issue before you get to the judge, because you don't know whether or not the judge is going to be honest and whether or not you're going to wind up in jail in an unjust situation. Now, so What happened here was that the individual that was left this affidavit on his front door began to question the situation, wanting to know 4 very specific things from the city before there was ever a court date set. In other words, when he got the affidavit, he began to rebut, and part of that rebuttal was to know the 4 legs of the controversy or ratification of commencement. And the city couldn't bring it forth. They couldn't bring him before the judge and accuse him of anything because it would have been fraud before the judge. So they never brought it before the judge. They continued it every month for 6 months. At the end of 6 months, in January, they said he had cut his grass. I don't know about y'all, we don't cut grass in January. And they released him and said that's the end of that. This has shown to work in one case. I think it will work in other cases. And I do know that there is an individual in Florida that has made this situation so untenable for the city they don't even come into his neighborhood anymore because he's made lots of money off of them because they violated his rights, not his privileges. Let me run on through this. Now the 4 things. The first, there has to be a responsible party for the city, the corporation, to stand and make the accusation. There has to be an account of damages. What damage did I do, my actions caused to the city or to you, the individual? It's 2. A witness. Can't be the code enforcement officer, can't be a police officer. He's a biased witness. Has to be somebody that has observed my actions and confirms the accuser that says that my actions have caused damages. And again, he has to have an account of his damages. It's 3. Law contract is broken. What law did I break because I have insects on my property? Now, all 4 of those things have to be present in order for there to be a controversy. Now, let me see if I can get this right. Now, here we're going to review everything. I'm going to go over this thing one more time. And I'm going to use a table to try to bring this into your mind and help remember. First, we have to have an accuser, and he has to complain to the authorities. And that is one leg of that table. All right, then we've got to have a breach of contract or law broken. That's the other leg of the table, second leg. Then we've got to have damages. What damages did the guy suffer because I did something against him? Well, that's the third leg, and that goes right there. And then we've got to have another leg of this table, and that is a witness. Has to be an unbiased witness, somebody that's outside the parameters. He can't be an employee of the person that is making the accusation. All right, that's the 4 legs of the controversy or the ratification of commencement. And that's what this individual, when he received that notice of public nuisance on his property, he began to ask these 4 things in writing. You can't ask an important question orally. It has to be notarized in order for your documents coming from private jurisdiction into public to take notice. It's best if you have 2 witnesses. As a matter of fact, if you have 2 witnesses, it's not absolutely necessary to have it notarized. My viewpoint is to notarize it and get 2 witnesses. All right, so let's go on further. The 4 legs support the table, and now the judge can come and place his scale on this table. Now his part in this is merely to allow the 2 parties, the plaintiff and the defendant, to put their papers on the scale or their evidence. Now if you rebut orally, what weight does that have against a written affidavit from the city? Has none. You have to rebut, and you have to rebut in a very specific manner in order for your rebuttal to take weight against that of the city. Now let's see where this goes. If one leg of the table is missing, the judge cannot place his scale on that table and then look at the evidence in order to determine which one has more weight. There is no subject matter, therefore the judge has no jurisdiction to enter the scene. And that was the case with this guy in Albertville. They would not allow him to move beyond those little swinging gates, which is the jurisdictional line for the judge. They always got him off in another room. They didn't even want people to hear what was going on. They wanted to know, did you do anything regarding the insects or do anything about cutting your grass? Now, he's talking about the merits of the case. You don't want to talk about the merits of the case because the four legs aren't here. We don't want to jump the gun. If the four legs aren't here, there can't be any merit to the case. Don't discuss with me, the lawyer, this is what he said to the lawyer, don't discuss with me anything dealing with what's on my private property until you come forward with all four legs. There's no subject matter here. You've got to produce those four legs in order for this controversy to exist, and then we can move forward and talk about maybe that my truck doesn't have a tag, or my truck doesn't run, or I may or may not have anything on my property. But at this point, you talk to me about these four legs. And that lawyer knew exactly what he was talking about. So now this is what we need to begin to understand in order to help. For instance, the church has responsibilities: widows and orphans. Now, if you know a widow in your neighborhood that has been visited, and by the way, I know in Huntsville, Alabama, there was a widow on fixed income, didn't even have enough money to run an air conditioner, didn't even have air conditioning. She had a window fan, and the window fan had been running long enough to have a dirt pattern in the screen. The code enforcement officer said that's not aesthetically pleasing and forced her into replacing those screens. Now, in my viewpoint, the church should have someone following that code enforcement officer and hit him over the head with this stuff. Now, that's very simply, and I hope I have run through this enough. Dave, if you think I need to go a little further, this is rather a long. Where does due process begin? Well, it begins in 525. It begins when a controversy arises. And now there's got to be those four things. And you want to bring this out before you have that court date. You want to get all this done and above board. You don't want to have your public resources used to adjudicate a case like this. Very simply. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. Therefore, a controversy between neighbors should be resolved without the aid of a third party, and the judge is that third party. So, I mean, y'all, and let me run on through here, run through some of these slides. I've already gone over all of these. Let me see what's happened. This is another maximum of law, and this is the definition for it. A principle of law universally admitted as being a correct statement of the law. That's the actual definition of a maximum of law. And there's several of them that apply in this particular case. Truth is expressed in the form of an affidavit. And that form that was left on his front door was an affidavit. And unless it's rebutted, it stands as truth. All right? Now, the agent has left this form on the door. An unrebutted affidavit stands as truth in commerce, and that's another maximum of law. All right, and here now is the Bible references for it. Affidavit is the highest form of truth. He who does not deny admits. Silence in this particular situation is an acknowledgement that what I have on my property is a public nuisance. You have to speak to this situation. All right, now unrebutted affidavit becomes a judgment in commerce, and that's exactly what's on that affidavit, is the judgment written at the bottom. It even goes as far as to say that you're voluntarily acknowledging that you're not going to appeal the case. So guess what happens when you go? If you go before the administrative judge and you say, I'm going to appeal it, and he says, fine, go right ahead, and you go to the appeals court and you haven't rebutted the affidavit that was left, guess what? You're acknowledging, I'm not going to appeal it. So why are you standing before the appeals court? You expect him to reverse that which you've already said you wouldn't do? Kind of get an idea of where all this comes from. Alabama Code 115 and 116 is interesting, because 115 says that a violation of the Code of Alabama is a public violation. In other words, if you violate any of the code, you're committing a public offense. But if the money goes into the coffers of the city, county, or state government, it is not a public offense. And that's what 116 says. So in this case, the city has made an accusation, and the money's going to go into their coffers, It's not a public offense. It is a contractual situation between you and that corporate body of the city. And that's what, and by omission, this, you have to read those two and to understand what is being said, because they don't, in a positive way, say it. They don't say it, and they define the two parameters, and you have to understand what's in between the sheets there. So that's what 115 is. This is just running through several more of these. This is a maximum law in commerce for any matter to be resolved. It's got to be expressed. Well, there's a written format from the city. You have to rebut or express yours in similar fashion. You can't go before them orally. In what manner did the government express itself? Of course, it put that affidavit on that scale, and there was an oral rebuttal. Of course, we know what weight that has, none. The property owner then puts in an affidavit that's notarized. It has more weight than the city's, and of course the scale tips in his view. Now, this is the definition of a notary. A notary is a public official who notarizes legal documents and can administer and take oaths and affirmations. That's the purpose of a notary. Why notarize? Personal documents which originate from another jurisdiction, your jurisdiction's private, must be notarized. Now here is why you have private jurisdiction. Goes right back to the chart, which you haven't really seen. Remember, we said in the 1700s there's no king but King Jesus. That authority then from that earthly king devolved into us, and we have private jurisdiction. Colossians 1:13 says that God the Father has placed me under the jurisdictional authority of the love of His Son. And my jurisdiction is private. My home is my castle. The officer of the state cannot enter it. I am king in my jurisdiction. And when I submit a document into the public jurisdiction, it's got to be notarized by an officer of the public domain or jurisdiction in order for it to take legal effect. And that's a reflection of all of this that we're not taught when we come into the system. And by the way, lawyers don't have a clue about any of this stuff. So next, personal documents which originate from another jurisdiction must be notarized, and that's just a restatement of the same. They can be officially used. Before they can be officially used as or recorded, they've got to be notarized before they can take legal effect. Now that's the actual definition if you go out and look it up for a notary. So they're letting you know that you've got to, in order for it to take effect in the court system, it's got to be notarized, or before you put it on public record, you need to have it notarized. So what has happened thus far? Well, the affidavit was left on the front door of a private property owner. Next, let's see, it stands as truth in commerce. Then it stands as judgment in commerce, this affidavit. And the city's affidavit has not been rebutted. And here now are more photographs of this guy's property. These are all taken by the code enforcement officer. And he was, let's see, accused, let's see, this was taken on June the 19th of 2011. Let's see, he appears on June the 25th before the city council and makes an oral rebuttal of jurisdictional authority. Of course, that went right over everybody's head. They don't understand jurisdiction at all, and they just said, you mean you're not in the city? You know, he wasn't referring, jurisdiction does not refer to territorial jurisdiction. You know, my private jurisdiction, I have a border around me. You can actually get nose to nose, and you have trespassed on me. So I have trespass means many things. And my private property begins with the fact that I have the right to breathe. That's the very first aspect of my private property. Okay, now his words have no effect. The agent's written statement stands as truth. August the 11th, he's arrested and set free on bond. Let's see, John Doe, sends a notarized letter to the city requesting specific things. And we got together and actually put these letters together. Now, there are certain things that we would change now after having looked at all this and what has happened to other people. Let's see, more than 1 month before the first hearing is scheduled, he sends all of these letters in requesting this information. And this, again, goes back to Matthew 5:25. Who you are is the very first thing. If you read pleadings from a lawyer, it'll start out and says, now comes so-and-so, but it doesn't define who comes. So if you allow that to stand, the judge can assume that you're a person and extend to you privileges that of a corporation, not rights that are unalienable, not even rights that are ascribed in the Constitution. It's up to him to decide. Okay, comes now, and you sign your name, here, one of the people, small p, I'm not a capital P, I'm not a representative of a state government in Washington, D.C. I am a resident, and that's the wrong word, I'm actually a man living on the land in the Republic, Alabama, and I am claiming all rights known or unknown, and I don't waive not one of them. That's the very first statement about who I am. Now, I have no known or unknown contract, license, franchise, or any other written or oral agreement of any type which in any way abrogates, violates, disparages, handicaps, or limits my unalienable rights affirmed in, but not limited to, the Constitution of the United States of America and the Republic, Alabama. Now, the other day I was asked, why is it the Republic, Alabama? Because the Constitution says every state in the Union shall be a republic. We are not a democracy. So that's why it says Republic, Alabama. Now, in this instance, the judge would have to come forward and prove that I have a license or a contract that in some way violates those rights. Now, in the Code of Alabama, 119 says that the code shall not affect a right, remedy, or defense. Here now I'm saying I'm a man with a living soul, living on the land republic, and the Code of Alabama does not affect me because I'm in that republic. And I'm saying, you come forward, judge, and show me any one of the agreements that I have with the state, city, or county that violates those rights granted to me by the code, by the Creator, and how the code now is affecting that. So that's establishing who I am, and this puts me back into common law so I can protect my rights. Now, we're going to go over some of the information that was in the letter that was sent to the city of Albertville, and he says, I am the only duly authorized administrator for the all caps name, because in order to have parity between a corporation and a living soul, they'll recognize you as an all caps name, and when you come forward and identify yourself as the all caps name, then you are on equal footing with the corporation. Here he's saying, I'm the administrator for this all corporation name that you have put in the documents, and I'm here to satisfy any agreement or any kind of legal requirements made of this legal corporation. But I'm the living soul, and you're not going to violate my rights, and I'm here to ensure that you don't violate the rights of my legal entity. And he says, I am authorized to settle all matters, public and private, for this all caps name, in an effort to ascertain the facts purported controversy between myself and the city of Albertville. Please respond to the following regarding this case number. Under what local ordinance am I being accused? That's the very first leg of the table. Who is the individual that is making the accusations against me? That would be a living soul. Let me go back now. Please provide me with a certified copy of his signed affidavit and contact information. This was the very first letter that was sent. Next, because I am not fully learned in these matters, who do I contact to subpoena this individual? Next he says, who is the witness that affirms the accusation of the accuser? Can't be the code enforcement officer. What damages has the accuser suffered by my actions? That should have been already submitted to the judge in order to get the judge to move against me. Of course, that didn't happen. Is the purported violation of a criminal or administrative nature? Of course, they're never going to answer that. That's going to be something that you're never going to get an answer on. Now, this has got to be a living soul. It can't be the lawyer for the city. He has no first-hand knowledge. In any of these cases, the lawyer cannot testify because he is a spokesperson and has no first-hand knowledge of anything that occurred. Okay, next, this individual wanted to have pauperous forms because he wanted the city to pay for this because they moved against him. He thought that this was something that shouldn't come out of his pocket. He says, I look forward to your signed, written response in a reasonable amount of time, in this case, so that he could resolve or respond properly before his trial date, which was set at October the 4th. Now, if you ask a question of your elected official, don't ask it orally. An important question I'm talking about. If you have an important question, you put it in writing. You identify who you are. That's the very first thing. And then you ask your question, and then you put at the bottom of it, I look forward to your signed written response within a reasonable amount of time. Because if you get an answer from him on an important question orally, what's it worth? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. So this is something to put into your quiver, because everybody here I consider to be an activist, and believe me, we're going to need all the arrows in our quiver before it's over with dealing with this situation. Now, he goes on and says, this is the response. This is what the lawyer for the city of Albertville sent back to him. He says, you are charged with violating a couple of ordinances. The complaint was signed by Officer Richard Adams. And then he says, the city declines to furnish any other information. So automatically he shot himself in the foot. But he doesn't know that this individual is knowledgeable enough to know that he's only got a couple of the legs to the table here, and he's left off the other two. So here now is what occurred after that. Silence can only be equated with fraud where there is a legal or moral duty to speak, or where an inquiry left unanswered would be intentionally misleading. Now these are some of this was actually included in the letter. So we're saying to the city, if you remain silent, brother, you're misleading me, and there's some fraud that's going on here. Now what is the definition of fraud? An intentional perversion of the truth for the purpose of inducing another in reliance upon it with some valuable thing belonging to him to surrender a legal right. In other words, we're wanting you to give up something that's of value or a legal right. And that legal right, remember, in the affidavit says that you're waiving an appeal. So can you see now, by not understanding this, you're agreeing, I'm not going to appeal this, and you go to the appeals court, guess what? He's going to rule against you. Just like the administrative court's going to rule against you. Okay, this now is the response from or one of the things that was sent to him. And he says, before me, the undersigned authority personally appeared on the undersigned date, and he made the complaint. And there was supposed to be a signature on this document that was sent to him. There was no signature. So all of this is bogus information that the city's just putting out there, trying to bluff this guy into agreeing to coming in and paying the fine. All right, now of course, again, there was no undersigned authority. And this is actually the charge that was made against him. Growth favoring insect harborage within the municipality of the city of Albertville or the police jurisdiction thereof. That was the actual charge. I just say he was charged with harboring insect. But this is the actual, this is what was stated on the document that he was sent. Now, a second notarized letter was sent to the court and the city attorney and placed on public record. So he's notifying everybody. He's not just notifying the lawyer, because the lawyer could contend, well, I didn't receive it. Although he does send it in. You can either send it in proof of delivery through the mail system, or you can go in and get a signed copy from the clerk. It makes no difference. But that's one thing you definitely want to do. But in this case, he sent it to the attorney and the mayor and the city council and, boy, you name it. All right, now, he acknowledged that the city of Albertville is at default because they haven't come forward with the needed information. There's no valid accusatory instrument, no opposing party who can show damages, no witness, therefore no controversy, therefore there is no subject matter, and the table has no legs. Now that's what this guy wrote. Of course he didn't put that at the bottom, but that's what he, at the top, that's what he put in the letter to the guy. Now, the letter included the maximum of law. A workman is worthy of his hire. It is against equity for free men not to have free disposal of their own property, and he included time as money. Then he ended this letter and he said, therefore, I submit the following invoice in the amount of for my appearance on a date to address unfounded, unconstitutional, fallacious, and frivolous charges. He says, I will accept Federal Reserve notes in the amount of, but would prefer United States gold or silver. So that's what he said to him. Now,
How
of course,
much did he ask for?
I can't remember. I think it was around $400 or $500 is what he asked for. But at this point now, this has already been dismissed, and he's working on a due process lawsuit against the city. But just having the knowledge of what to do in this case is worth an untold amount of money for any widow. And I'm sure that, you know, you're going to build something in heaven for yourself should you help a widow or orphans in this situation. So,
Is jurisdiction of the private jurisdiction the same as common law jurisdiction?
is private jurisdiction? Yes, I don't know the definitive answer, but I would say yes off the cuff.
But private jurisdiction also encompasses the gifts of God too, right?
Yes, certainly.
And you know, this has been a question in my mind for a long time. Is that even greater than the common law? Because of you know, there is still in the law, you know, an ecclesiastic jurisdiction.
Yes.
And I'm aware of it because of a certain term that I saw validated in a response from
Right.
a clerk's office. And so I don't know that.
Now, let me along the, you just spurred something in my mind that I haven't thought of recently. The court of equity actually began out of the ecclesiastical court. Because what happened in the Crusades was the king would send off a property owner, a lord typically, to fight, and they would transfer ownership of the property to a trusted individual. Well, of course, you know what happens. After a while, the guy's off, you know, 6 months, 2 years, whatever, and he comes back and he says, I want my property back. Well, now, you know what the guy's going to say. Oh, you don't really want to do that, do you? Well, this now happened that there were two individuals that the king had favor for. He couldn't deny one without causing problems. So he set up a court of equity that had the religious leader as its head that would decide the dispute between the two people. And that court of equity then got incorporated into the legal system over time. So when you talk about equity, that was the original roots of it, going back to a religious law, a religious court set up under the authority of the king.
Yeah, I just remembered the term that I saw was poll deed. And poll deed, it has something to do, I think, with asserting who you are as a child of God, this kind of thing. And I heard this guy talking about poll deed. I'd never heard the term. I was wondering if he was making it up. And then one day I go to a meeting of his, and he brings out this document where the clerk, it says, "Oh, do you mean the poll deed?" And it's right there in it. And so then I knew the guy was really telling the truth.
Yeah, now let me talk about something that is developing. We haven't brought this to fruition yet. And it stems in part from this. It is a fact that the elected official has an oath of office. And his oath of office says that I'm going to respect the Constitution and what the Constitution means to your unalienable rights, and I'm going to protect that. Well, we have now the thought that we are going to send a negative averment, an affidavit that is formed in a negative averment. In other words, if I say I have evidence that you have violated my rights, then I have to produce the evidence. If I say that there is no evidence that you have not violated my rights, then you have to come forward and prove that you have not violated my rights. In this case, it would be silence. If you're silent in this case, you are acquiescent to my position that indeed you have violated my rights. Now, we're not going to take this to court because we know that the court's going to rule against us. We're going to go to the bonding company. In Alabama, if a public official cannot hold his bond or have a bond, he's out of office within 30 days. So if we can build a case where the principal, this would be the elected official, has sent a code enforcement officer and has harassed and harangued a property owner, private property owner, and we send a series of negative virulent statements to him, first identifying who we are, looking for a signed written response within a reasonable amount of time, stating that your agent has come to a private jurisdiction and has caused this, this, and this to be done to that private property owner, and you have violated his unalienable rights. Now come forward and prove where is your jurisdictional authority to take such action. And he is silent, or he responds, and we look at the response and determine that it's not acceptable. Then we build a case over time, and we take that information to the bonding company, and we say to them, here's our evidence, we're going to go to court, do you want to stand behind this individual? And if they relinquish that surety bond for that individual in office, he's out of office, unless he can get another one in 30 days in Alabama. So that's very simply what we're aiming for, and we have officials that have violated rights. Now we're looking to do this at the local level against a very small, maybe code enforcement officer. We're looking to learn how to do this, and we're hoping to have this done, I don't know, within a year. It takes longer to do things than I ever thought it would, but I do know that there's a clerk of court that refused to transmit pleadings that were needed in an appeal. This person has violated someone's rights of appeal, due process violation. So that's documentable. We can document her actions. And I don't know whether that's going to be the first one or other cases where there was actually a case in North Alabama where they foreclosed, they being a mortgage company, bank, foreclosed on a property owner that was not behind in the notes. And the canceled check, the guy's got the canceled check, and on the back of it, it says transferred the funds to a specific fund within the bank and was not applied to the mortgage. After a certain amount of time, they declared it to be delinquent and moved against him for foreclosure. Well, the guy got up in court and said, first, I want to have the officer of the bank come forward so that I can cross-examine him and determine why the funds from this check were not applied against my mortgage. Well, they refused to allow him to have that cross-examination or examination of the officer of the corporate body that made the accusation that he was default in the contract. So now he's not only appealing this case, but he's going against the bonds for not only the judge, but the officers, the lawyers for the plaintiff.
Okay, now the four legs, it seems to me that a large purpose of the four legs is to establish that you aren't in commerce, that you're not in admiralty, you're not in merchant law, you're not in equity, that there is no contract. So in a way, that is deals with consent too, right? You're not consenting to be in their compelled performance.
That's true.
Law courts,
that's true.
Right?
That's fancy language there, Dave.
I know, but the thing we have, I think the thing that we have to know is that we can't have liberty in their courts. We can only have it in our own courts.
We have to reestablish the fact that we can have liberty in their court, and we need them to uphold the tenets of their oath of office, which says that they're going to protect our unalienable rights.
Oh, so in other words, that's interesting, because if they're taking the oath of office for their courts too, and they're in violation.
Yes,
okay.
And we have to prosecute that.
Okay, no, that's, thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. Any, Charles?
Yeah, I'm not sure how far you go beyond this, but how do you see this applying to some of these Agenda 21 comprehensive plan
most definitely.
issues? Yeah.
The very first thing that I think ought to be done is a statement of who you are. And you could actually just put something simple on public record, that the comprehensive plan is in violation of the oath of office of all elected officials that have had, let's see, first that signed this and adopted into law, and all of the elected officials that have come afterward that have not rescinded this, they are in violation, and I'm just making this statement public. Now, the next thing that you might want to do would be to send a statement of negative averment that the comprehensive plan is in violation of the tenets of the constitutions, both state and federal, and that you need to come forward and prove that it is not. My opinion about all this is that this has application for so many different things, but we need to start with some simple, very low individual. For instance, I know that one individual is talking about going against the county commission. And my viewpoint is, don't go against the whole county commission, go against one individual, and likely you'll drive that wedge, especially if there's validity in this, and the parties will step aside and allow him to be affected by this situation. Now, if that should work, then you could apply it to the other ones. But at any rate, if lightning strikes between the county commissioners, they step aside and they don't want to have anything to do with the lightning bolt coming back. So it may have a lasting effect on the other ones that are in office.
Now, the maximum laws, that they do have force of laws, correct?
If they're applied within the parameters of the pleadings, that's correct.
That's right, because I remember when my mother had a court case against a contractor, I couldn't understand it at the time because he used the doctrine of clean hands, that when you bring an action, you can only come into court with clean hands.
Exactly.
And I couldn't figure out where the heck that was coming. I never saw any law that, about clean hands, I've seen signs on bathrooms, wash your hands and that kind of thing, but not in the law. So.
But that is a maximum law.
Yes, you must have clean hands.
And they're quite interesting just to read. I mean, they're amazing to me.
But my mother had to pay the people bringing the charges a fine. But actually, I would think that if they had not clean hands, then she should not have had to pay a fine. But we didn't know that at the time, because we didn't know what he was doing with his
Charles.
Kind of magic going
So
on.
has anyone tried this in the case of some of these comprehensive plans or commissioners or?
No, we're just in the process of getting to the point where, and I don't know which one's going to happen first. I've talked to people in Georgia, Florida, Virginia, and of course Alabama. I expect that the case of the judge that denied the right of questioning of the officer of the corporation for the bank to be the first one. I don't know that. I don't know who's going to do this first, but I sure am anxious to see it happen. I do know that what happened with the four legs of the controversy, it did work. And I think it has very specific applications.
I've seen this method work locally with a fellow I know who got in trouble on traffic charges and things, and he asserted his unalienable rights, who he was, would not consent to be in commerce or under contract. And yeah, they threw him in jail. He was in jail for like 3 days or something. But since he stuck to his guns, all the charges were dropped. And the reason why they were dropped is because nobody wanted to pursue it because they didn't want commercial liability. They didn't want to have to pay money. So
well, see, that goes back to 115 and 116 of the Alabama Code. If it's not a public offense, then it's an action in commerce between the corporation of the city or state or county against you. So.